This week on the Journal Editorial Report, President Obama's marijuana musings. Do his recent comments fly in the face of the facts and his own administration's policies? Plus, with opening ceremonies less than 2 weeks away, security concerns plague the Sochi Olympics. So how real are the threats? And feeling the Obamacare heat as midterms approach, vulnerable Democrats are running against the unpopular law. Will their strategy work? Welcome to the Journal Editorial Report. I'm Paul Gigot. President Obama causing a firestorm this week with his comments on marijuana, telling the New Yorker magazine, quote, "As has been well documented, I smoked pot as a kid, and I view it as a bad habit and a vice, not very different from the cigarettes that I smoked as a young person up through a big chunk of my adult life. I don't think it is more dangerous than alcohol," end quote. The president called the Colorado and Washington legalization experiments important for society and said he is troubled that poor kids are more likely to get locked up for smoking pot than their middle-class counterparts. Here to sort through the president's claims are Wall Street Journal columnist and deputy editor Bret Stephens, political diary editor Jason Riley, and columnist Mary Anastasia O'Grady. So, Jason, I interpret the president's comments as saying he thinks that marijuana should be legalized. How do you read it?
I think that's a correct interpretation, Paul. But I think even people who favor decriminalization or legalization of marijuana still want a stigma attached to its use for no other reason to discourage children from using the drug. And I think when a president comes out and says essentially it's no big deal, it hurts that effort. But secondly, Paul, and more importantly, the president swore to uphold the law. Not some of the laws or only the ones that are politically convenient for him. All of the laws. And if this president wants to encourage civil disobedience, which I think he's essentially doing here.
You think he went that far with this? You think that's what he was doing?
When you say it's no big deal, I think that's essentially what you're doing. And if he wants to do that, he should leave office and do so as a private citizen, the way people like Martin Luther King did. Not as president, his role is to uphold the law.
Mary, let me elaborate on that. There is a law called the Controlled Substances Act of 1970. Under that law, it's a federal statute, applies to all the states. It is illegal to smoke marijuana, and it is a Schedule 1 substance, meaning that it has danger of being abused under the law. Right. What about Jason's point about enforcing the law?
Well, Paul, as you know, I'm a long-term opponent of the war on drugs and the prohibition. And I'm in good company there with William F. Buckley, Milton Friedman, George Shultz, many conservatives who believe that the current policy undermines the rule of law, makes kids in poor neighborhoods more vulnerable, and doesn't do anything really to end use. So we need to change the policy, and I don't think we are ever going to get change coming from Washington, because that's not where change comes from in any way, shape, or form. So it was always going to come from the grassroots. I agree with Jason that the president has no right to go out there and say that marijuana is the same as alcohol. There's no medical evidence for that. In fact, there's a big debate about how dangerous it is, and it's more dangerous than when he used it because it's been
souped up
with more vibrant ingredients, and it can be very dangerous, especially for people whose brains are not totally formed.
And that grassroots, as you say, from the states, Colorado and Washington have legalized it. But what about this issue that Jason zeroed in on, which is that we have the laws on the books, right? The Controlled Substance Act that I talked about. If the president wants to change it, is he obliged to actually say, you know what, I'm going to submit a bill to change it if I think it should be changed? Jason says he should resign. I would stop short of that and say what he ought to do is actually submit, you know what, the views on this in America are changing. I support legalization. Here's my bill to amend that law.
You know, Paul, the president has a leadership problem, and it's just, this is another manifestation of that problem. By all means, if he thinks that the prohibition is actually hurting children in poor neighborhoods more than it's helping protect them, then he should go out and try to change the policy. So that's, you know, his number one offense. And then secondly, like I said, to somehow condone the use for young people when we don't know how dangerous it is. And I think what we're going to find out is that some brains can take it and some cannot, just like with alcohol. So it is a dangerous substance.
Brett.
Look, the president also has a symbolic function in this country, and I never thought I'd reach the age, but I have, when I started arguments by saying, as a parent, I feel X. Well, as a parent, I feel disappointed and let down by a president who makes a comment that I would never, ever make to my children. And I suspect that many people watching the show who have young children, as I do, were horrified that the president was essentially saying to the kids of America, it's bad, but, you know, it's not really that much worse than those old movie stars who were lighting up cigarettes and having a martini, or, you know, like a James Bond kind of figure. It is worse, and it's culturally different, and has different sorts of effects, and it has the stigma of almost a century of illegality. We can have a debate. I certainly wouldn't call on the president to resign. Presidents all the time disagree with laws.
I didn't call on him to resign. I said if he wants to promote civil disobedience, he should do so as a private citizen, not as president.
One of the problems here is that pot is not stigmatized, and the rule of law grows out of the norms and values of the population. And when a large part of the population doesn't think there's anything wrong with using pot, and there's a law, they're going to just ignore that, and that undermines the rule of law more
Under
broadly.
medical marijuana, 3% of the marijuana, you could have a card in Colorado for medical marijuana. 3% of the state had the card saying they could legally buy marijuana. I doubt 3% of the whole state was buying it for pain relief. So we do have a kind of de facto legalization already.
And by the way, very
states.
quickly, this number you hear, 750,000 people in jail for marijuana, that's not correct. It's a tiny fraction. Many arrests, very few incarcerations.
All right, thank you. Well, there's a lot more to debate about this. When we come back, security concerns grow ahead of the Olympic Winter Games. So just how safe is Sochi?